All right, go on to the next one. So this one is coming from BBC, titled "Eat What You Want, Pay What You Can" at restaurants across Mexico City. And I actually thought this was very interesting. We talked, Justin and I've talked a lot. I think this came up in the EMP episode. It's come up in my content for years in Line Cook Thoughts. This idea of Michelin-starred food not being accessible to a swath, I'd say 95% of the general public, due to its price. So there's this restaurant, Michelin-starred Masala y Maiz, hopes to spread the trend across Mexico and around the world. Chefs Norman, Listman, and Saqib Keval, they're the owners and chefs at this Mexico City restaurant, and they won their first Michelin star. And they were highlighted in BBC due to their very groundbreaking mode of payment for diners. So, quote, our team was calling us and we weren't answering the phone. This is them on receiving the Michelin star. And then the nerdiest of our managers, the most serious one, calls, and I was like, he never calls unless something is wrong. Turns out that we were live on the stage at the Michelin Awards. So they're known for their Eat What You Want, Pay What You Can initiative. And it is an initiative that started out of them wanting to support their community. So basically, what happens is several times a year, restaurant goers are offered a menu of the restaurant's signature Mexican, African, and Indian fusion dishes, alongside an envelope in which to leave whatever payment they have available or deem acceptable. There is no bill and no reservations. Guests must line up for a first come, first serve experience, and there is one requirement. Diners must write how much of what they've left is intended for the staff rather than the restaurant itself. So how much they're actually paying the staff. So the practice is intended to ensure that everyone in the city, regardless of their economic status, can enjoy these dishes. They talk about how Mexico City is dealing a lot with gentrification, over tourism, and so actually their actions have inspired 20 additional Mexico City eateries to participate in August 27th, which just happened, on a Eat What You Want, Pay What You Can day. The event is to be the first of what Keval hopes will become a tradition around the world. Quote, we've had people from Chile reach out, from Colombia, from other parts of Mexico, and from Peru that want to join, and I don't see why this couldn't be like Pay What You Can International. So basically, this idea that, and it's a beautiful restaurant. I mean, there's pictures in this BBC article of the interior. I've seen some of their food. It's quite awesome to see, everything going on. But I think what was interesting for me is I think I'm very bullish on this idea that as we have gaps in classism and what people can afford to eat, the next wave of hospitality is allowing more people into the door. And what this does is it gives people in your community a chance to eat the food that they can experience while allowing upper class people, like wealthier individuals in your community, to pick up the tab per se. And while this isn't their main business model, this isn't like they do this every day. Having these opportunities, they say in the article, like they'll have guests come in that are more well off, and they'll pay 3 to 4 times more what the check average was, just because obviously it's for the community. It's a sense of pride. It's a sense of wanting to support the staff in the restaurant. So I found this very interesting because in a world where in restaurants where margins are so thin, to take the risk to do something like this and see it pay off, not only in an accolade for their food, but also in recognition from their community and obviously the international restaurant community, I think it's like really A, thought provoking, but B, it just shows like a level of leadership that I think we need more of in restaurants, which is there's a class of people there's a group of people that cannot afford our food. Let's be open to them and let them try it. They should not be able to try it, especially if we're cooking in their community. So your thoughts?
So I love the story. Chef Saqib and I are mutuals on Instagram, so we are, we're not, I wouldn't call us friends, but we follow each other, we message each other sometimes, and it's really cool to see both the experimentation side and then the vulnerability side and the way that he engages with, I think he has another organization called People's Kitchen Collective as well that he is like a part of and supports and stuff like that. And so I think the initial place where my brain went was, what are some other examples of this? It's not just one price for the experience. And I think we've seen this with things like dynamic pricing on reservations, where a Saturday night 8 o'clock reservation is going to be more expensive than a Tuesday 5 o'clock reservation, for example. And what we've seen with some of these like more hype driven, you almost kind of like hierarchically arrange, the experiences in a certain way. Those fall victim to some of these like scalping style behaviors where people will go and, have bots snag the 8 p.m. Saturday night reservations, and then just sell them at a markup to other people who, are able to pay quote unquote more. And so that kind of dispelled that myth in my mind, or that belief that I had in my mind of like, well, maybe there should be at least a baseline price, or like that's where I came into seeing the story from, where I was like, well, how is this going to break down? And certainly, and I think you kind of touched on this, this is not a realistic thing that everybody is either being suggested to do or that it's going to work for every single type of business. I think the way that they've decided to do it, the order of operations for this is also interesting. You launch the concept, you get the accolades and awards where the trust is there, and there's almost like the demand has been generated. And now the way that you're going to charge and price things is a little bit more based out of human nature, maybe is like maybe not the way to say it, but I guess where I sometimes push back, or the place where I have a hesitation here is people almost taking advantage of this. Like that's the thing that I want to make sure that businesses that are listening to this avoid. And it might be something where it's not every night that you do this. And, this might be if you're maybe wanting to adopt some of this strategy into your own business, maybe that's a takeaway that you could have, where it is, we want to open things. I think we've seen other examples of restaurants where they open it for students, or I think certain restaurants do it for, it's like a kids' night at the restaurant where, as long as you're under the age of, I think it's like 16 or something like that, you come in with your parents and you can have this meal, and it's a different price because, again, it is this example of wanting to open the doors up wider for a larger swath of people to kind of come in. My brain went with it's almost like a social experiment at the table. I see some of this play out. I think maybe might make guests uncomfortable. I don't necessarily know, like, how does that experience, I've certainly been at places where we have that culture already with tipping, right? So like there's this expectation that you need to give a little bit more beyond what the receipt price says. And there's a societal expectation of percent that we're going to add up and on top of. I just don't know from an uncomfortability perspective, are you actually like maybe detracting from the hospitality experience? I don't know. Like I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here because it is so new and I just kind of want to see where this lands, but fascinating story. I'm curious to kind of see how it develops and if this becomes something that they can either maintain long term. I know that like there was a couple people at MAD in Copenhagen in May who are also from Mexico City talking about these fascinating ways that they're thinking about farming and taking care of purveyors and setting up areas in the city that are, kind of like dedicated to some of these newer businesses that I just don't think is happening in other cities. And so Mexico City is just this fascinating testing ground for some of these new ideas.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see. And I think one thing I really want to clarify, because when I read this article or when I saw the headline, I was like, oh, this restaurant like has this model. Does only happen several times a year.
Got it.
That is a good clarification, because when you read it, you're like, oh, this is like, how do they like, ever budget?
Yeah. Well, and that's where my head went, because I had a friend go to this restaurant a couple weeks ago, and I was messaging with Saqib to try to help get a reservation table for my friend. And it was this situation where I don't think that I feel like he would have messaged me if that was the experience, because he's also very nerdy about restaurants and food and all these sorts of things. And so good clarification just in there. Anything else on that point?
Nope, that's it. You're up.